Season 2. Welcome back to the Ishaan S Show. Today is the season premiere, and we have a lot to cover. We'll talk about this past summer in politics, President Biden's approval numbers, gridlock in Washington, and so much more. New episodes start right now, today, October 22nd, 2021. From Anchor by Spotify, this is the Ishaan S Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics from the perspective of a 15-year-old. With me, your host, Ishaan. Welcome back, everybody, to the first episode of the brand new season of the Ishaan S Show. Oh my God, I'm so happy to be able to return to the intriguing world of podcast making, and I'm so looking forward to this new season. As I had promised over 2 months ago, I did return, and this season, I think, is going to be fun with all kinds of things on the plans. If you haven't already, go follow the show on Instagram and Twitter at the Ishaan S Show, and do not forget to check out the IshaanSshow.com, where I do realize not many posts have come, but look out for them. Now, my break was very nice. I started school again, back in person, got to see all my great friends. I've tried to pursue a few other projects, typical hiatus stuff. But at some point very recently, I began to feel very restless about not having the show, posting regular episodes. I kept feeling like I needed to come back. I needed to start things again. I needed to restart my analysis. And I kept telling myself that day would eventually come, but I needed to push it further and further. Then, to that recent moment that I just mentioned, I felt like I couldn't wait anymore. I thought that it was just time. So I decided literally that week that this show was indeed going to come back for a second season, and the trailer came out that week. So this is a political show, and I'd be remiss if I weren't to talk about the political world. So since I last talked to you guys on August 10th, a whole lot of things have changed, and honestly, I did not see many of those coming. You'd think that things would stay relatively simple, at least the same, at least for a couple of weeks. But just days after I left, everything just fell like crazy. On the same day the hiatus began, Andrew Cuomo had officially submitted his resignation and stepped down from his job as governor of the state of New York, and he was replaced by his lieutenant governor, Kathy Hochul. I believe during the season finale, I talked about how a few provinces in Afghanistan were at threat of being taken over by the Taliban. Well, days later, on August 15th, the Taliban gained control of the Afghan capital of Kabul and thereby Afghanistan. Here at home, infrastructure, yay, infrastructure, the infrastructure package has become something of a mess, with literally everyone pissed off about it. The January 6th House Committee is launching fireball after fireball through their investigation with their recent votes to subpoena a slew of Trump administration officials and a more recent vote to hold Steve Bannon, a former advisor to former President Donald Trump, in criminal contempt, which essentially is recommending the Department of Justice to begin charging Bannon. It was a long break. I wanted to start off this fun episode with a spiel on President Biden. So before we left in August, President Biden was looking like he was in a very comfortable spot, and it seemed like there wasn't much to topple him over. a 54% approval rating, people from the other side voting for his policies, bipartisanship, and record deal-making were all happening. So what happened? Well, Afghanistan happened. So it was President Biden's decision to withdraw all troops from the country by the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. But more logistically, that date would more likely be August 31st. He had inherited a deal from the Trump administration with provisions of a similar substance, but didn't have much to work around. So withdrawing the troops by his selected date was kind of set in stone and was really all he could do. Biden's generals and people at the Pentagon did warn the president of the risks of leaving Afghanistan too soon. And they said that if we were to do that, the U.S.-backed government would fail and collapse and fall into the hands of the Taliban. There were warnings. As we were approaching this day, Biden kept reassuring members of the media, members of the government, and of course, most importantly, the American people, that the exit and withdrawal was going to be smooth and that it did not pose a threat to the safety and security of American service members and citizens in that country. The president kept promising all this stuff, but then as this date got even closer on our calendars, the Taliban started to make a huge resurgence to the level that everyone in Washington, D.C. and around the world was petrified. Mind you that the Taliban is not an ideal group of people to govern. They have a very draconian, middle-aged type of governing structure that uses a very strict interpretation of Islam through which they justify things like denying women really basic liberties and freedoms. They use it to execute people in public, ban music, forbidding foreign influence, anything perceived like that. The Taliban coming in was indeed a problem and not in our country's best interests. So on August 15th, the whole world tuned into their television screens and news sources as we all woke up to the news that the Taliban was near Kabul. I remember waking up that Sunday, reading the news headline, and then heading straight for the TV to monitor the situation. And throughout the day, the headlines were changing rapidly. The Taliban are near Kabul. The Taliban are just outside of Kabul. The Taliban are kind of in Kabul. The Taliban are definitely in Kabul. The Taliban have taken over Kabul. The Taliban have taken over Afghanistan. This was all unfolding so quickly. And during all of this, the President of the United States was not outlining a clear plan to address this crisis. It's true. At this point, there were servicemen and women in that city, along with diplomats and U.S. citizens, who now just simply needed to get out. Later, we heard that the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, one of the most guarded embassies anywhere on the planet, began discarding documents and clearing out shop as fast as they could and heading straight for the airport. In the meanwhile, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled his country and on that day was reportedly in Tajikistan, although it was just unknown at the time. We'd only find out a few weeks later that he was in the United Arab Emirates, seeking refuge there. The 300,000-strong Afghan military now, at this point, had stopped fighting back and let the city get invaded. And by the end of the night, here in the U.S., the entire country of Afghanistan was blown off course. Now, of course, not all of this crisis is President Biden's fault. The fact of the matter is that his administration inherited some faulty provisions that did not compel them to, or did not really help them avoid this entirely. If former President Donald Trump was still in office, then this was very likely going to happen as well. You know, I hear all these people say that if President Trump was in office, this would never happen. It would be so smooth. And I mean, we can't predict what could have happened because honestly, there's no point to predicting that. But the thing is, this very likely could have happened if we were looking at a second Trump term, and it could have happened actually even sooner, since Trump was flirting with a May 1st deadline to withdraw. So this is not entirely President Biden's fault. He kind of inherited a broken-ish deal. But there were major shortcomings on the part of this administration that truly desecrated the effort of withdrawing people and really turned this into a botched withdrawal. Constraining U.S. forces to the August 31st deadline was never going to be easy. That September 11th image was purely for optics, and I don't see how that was a good decision. And, it was limiting them to that was never, getting them out by that deadline was never going to be easy. And his generals warned him of this. His lack of inaction, at least visible inaction, in the hours that led up to this fall were not going to earn him points. And the speed at which the entire city and rather country fell with American lives in danger could have very well gone terrible, and thank God it didn't. So President Biden had several hiccups with this plan, and the Afghanistan of today is not going to be blamed for him, but ultimately, he did not help to create a better environment to prevent something like this from happening. And it's going to be a key factor in defining his first year in office. During the remaining days of the withdrawal, U.S. Embassy staff, U.S. citizens, U.S. service members, Afghans, and other nationals were getting evacuated from the airport in the largest airlift in human history. Now, I must also add that it was during this evacuation airlift that an ISIS bomber attacked one part of the Kabul airport with a suicide vest and killed many Afghans, but also killed 13 U.S. service members. Afghanistan has always been a complicated and tough topic for so many Americans. But I think after this past August, we as Americans and really a world have been exposed to the vulnerabilities of the planet, and we were shown just how quickly everything can change or return to an old time. The Taliban now runs things in Afghanistan, and they may do all kinds of things. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot we can do. I think it was these feelings that really tanked President Biden's approval numbers as well. As people say in the world of politics, his honeymoon period was over. The honeymoon period is either a short or long period of positive approval a president experiences immediately after taking office. Now, according to 538, on August 30th, President Biden had officially had a majority disapproval by the American public. And if I'm not wrong, if you can check on 538.com yourself, but I don't think he's actually been positively approved since that day. So that's really what started things. We're going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, I'll start to talk about other issues the Biden administration has been facing and what the consequences of these blunders and crises are for the president and his party. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, so we're back from the break. Now, before I left, we were talking about the Afghanistan crisis and how that very much was harmful to Biden's approval, but also how it wasn't entirely his fault. That's kind of been the theme of American politics these past couple of months. It wasn't entirely my fault. Now, we're at a point where we need to now expect damage control with every blunder that occurs. And we also need to understand the reasons behind key decisions without thinking too much. Now, how does that work? What am I saying? Well, let's take the example of Afghanistan. It was just a screw-up, and that's all you can take it to. It wasn't an elaborate plot. It wasn't incompetent leaders who didn't know what they were doing. It wasn't forced. It was plainly a screw-up. This is the lens that we'll need to start analyzing politics with, and for better or for worse, it can open so many opportunities and losses. But anyway, looking at the infrastructure package that I mentioned earlier, that's been another key legislative goal and priority for the Biden administration. Like, they need to get this passed if they want any success in future upcoming elections, or to earn the faith of the Democratic Party apparatus. This infrastructure deal has things that address fixing roads, improving water systems, building bridges, typical infrastructure. But then it has a massive price tag that's going to need to be sold to people in the House and the Senate. Well, not in the Senate anymore. It's past there, but now in the House. The bill that President Biden unveiled back in March is very different from the one that we have here and has been very toned down. So many Democrat listeners of mine might be wondering, are we just not going to have some of the stuff you might be asking for? So we may not have them in the infrastructure deal, but the Democrats have found their way into a separate Democrat spending bill via a rule in the Senate known as reconciliation. This bill has all kinds of caveats that make up a huge part of the Democratic Party and Joe Biden's agenda. Through this reconciliation rule, which you can learn more about in other episodes of the Ishaan S show, you'll learn that only 51 votes are required for it to pass, but because we only have 50 Democrats, it's going to be VP Harris who's going to break that tie. Now, this package has the establishment of universal pre-K, creating a paid family and medical leave program, addressing climate change, and other Democrat agenda things, generally what they want. This package now has a combined total of about $1.9 trillion. And if that sounds big, it was $3.5 trillion. I think that's the number that I brought to you the last time we were up here. So, it's a big spending bill. So the infrastructure package is out of the Senate and is now up for a vote in the House. But this reconciliation package is still under active negotiations. This package does not retain a good amount of support amongst the party. Or rather, it does retain that support, but with a 50-50 split Senate with only one VP Harris to break the tie, every Democrat is necessary to participate in order to get this to advance. That's where the Democratic Party's two favorite senators, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, come into the picture. These two are essentially running D.C. right now, and they hold some really unparalleled power that not many get to enjoy. Why? Because these two people are moderate Democrats. And moderate Democrats, you need to understand, are really, I'm not trying to categorize moderate Democrats, but I'm just saying that these Democrats do not typically represent the stereotypical Democrat that we get. Like, these people can be very conservative, but align with the Democrats on just a 50+1 set of issues versus, the Republican Party. These two Democrat moderates, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, they come from two Republican states. Sinema comes from Arizona and Joe Manchin comes from West Virginia. The reality now for Joe Manchin, we'll look at him first, is that being a Democrat in West Virginia is truly difficult. You literally cannot confidently do any type of political activity in this state if you're a Democrat. How Manchin is a Democrat from West Virginia. It's a big deal, I guess. He's on a really thin string, and if he were to make just one voter mad in a state, think about how that can spread so quickly. More and more can fall, and that's the end of his political career. His elections have been getting closer and closer, so he needs to be very wary of his electorate. So that's why he's super conscious about the decisions he makes, especially when it comes to these types of bills where you're spending trillions and trillions of dollars. He's not even from a swing state. He's from a state that I believe had one of the highest vote shares for Donald Trump in both 2016 and 2020, in which all counties went red for Trump. But then there's Kyrsten Sinema. I get that she's a moderate. She has her beliefs and all but a lot of her political shenanigans, if you will, don't make a lot of sense to me. There is, to a certain extent, some core sets of beliefs and values that politicians believe in. But after that point, it's all about winning re-election. That's just a universal thing in politics. You can strongly feel about so many issues, but at the end of the day, you have a really big goal, and that is to win re-election. Kyrsten Sinema is clearly making very deliberate political decisions in an effort to shape her re-election bid, which I think she's up in 2024, similar to Joe Manchin, actually. But why is this weird? Well, Arizona has always been a changing state in terms of its politics. It's not nearly as Republican as West Virginia is right now. In 2020, Democrat Joe Biden won this state's electoral college votes and broke the 20-plus year period of no Democrat candidates for president winning in the state. A majority of the Arizona delegation that goes to the House of Representatives is Democrat. Last year, in a special election, Arizona voters elected Democrat Mark Kelly to represent them in the U.S. Senate. Kyrsten Sinema doesn't need to be nearly as cautious about something like this infrastructure package as Mr. Manchin might be. She is in a prime swing state whose democratic shift could actually be said was started by her own election. This Democrat shift in Arizona actually happened very quickly. For some context, in 2004, George Bush won this state with a plus 10% margin. In 2012, Mitt Romney won the state by a plus 9% margin, and in 2016, Donald Trump won the state with a plus 3% margin. Then just 2 years later, in the midterms, Kyrsten Sinema beat Martha McSally by 2.4%. Now, 2.4% doesn't sound very big, but when you think about it, it's a 5-point shift in just 2 years. That is a massive, massive amount by political standards, especially when you're looking at a state that is that used to be so aligned with a certain party. And by political standards, it's just a big deal. So I'm sure you now get what I mean when I say that she was the beginning of Arizona's swing state status. And to some extent, the Democratic shift in Arizona, her victory. Now, rounding this stuff back to infrastructure, Senator Sinema and Manchin are going to be clear key players in the future of the reconciliation package. And no matter how you feel about these two, that bill is going to be dependent on each of their votes. And there are signs that Democrats are trying to win their support. I recall that earlier this week, the Democrats actually removed free 2-year community college from the plan. I'm certain that this was just a direct effort to court Sinema and Manchin's support. Now, infrastructure and Afghanistan, in my view, have been the two most critical events that have occurred or have been occurring during the duration of this show's hiatus. You know, there are so many other things that definitely warrant a discussion, but it's not realistic for me to put all that much information into a podcast episode. but, maybe I'll cover it later. Who knows? But I want to look at the implications of what has happened and how they impact President Biden and the Democratic Party, since next year's midterms, at this point so far, is their game to lose. So first off, Afghanistan. I think this blunder is going to hands down hurt President Biden and the Democrats for sure. I don't see any way that the president can put a positive spin on getting out of the country the way he did. The chaotic exit, loss of life, collapse of government, and takeover by the Taliban are going to be things he needs to answer for. And I don't know if there is an answer that he can give. So that's going to hurt him. But in order to counteract this blunder of the administration, I have a strong feeling people in Biden world feel like they need to pass the infrastructure bill. I get that. This infrastructure package is pretty much the best thing going for Biden right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if Biden was found to be taking every legal, of course, effort to get that bill passed. This is really the only thing he and his party can claim they did, a massive, rather, thing that they did when it comes time for campaigning next year. Because Democrats need to go back to their districts and their states and say, hey, we did stuff with President Biden. We did this stuff, and it's a big deal. So far, they don't really have that really big deal. Maybe the stimulus package from earlier this year, sure, but Biden needs a lasting package or piece of legislation that really helps carry him through the midterms. But we're going to need to watch this proposal since we're right now very close to that vote. We're not quite there yet. I'm pretty sure that whenever it comes to the floor, I will talk about it here on the show, and we're going to have to, see how the results turn out. So that does it for us here today. Thank you so much for joining me today for the beginning of our brand new season. If you liked my commentary, then go ahead and follow at the Ishaan S Show on Twitter and Instagram for breaking news posts and updates about the show. And if you want to hear more political stories, then check out the political news blog at theishaansshow.com. Do us a favor and share this episode and all the other episodes with your friends and family. It's the best way for this show to grow and get more people to listen to it. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.